One of the most important metrics to improve to live a long and healthy life is glucose. Being overweight is greatly associated to poor glucose control or metabolic dysfunction. Considering the big effect glucose has on overall health, stabilizing glucose levels is one of the highest return on investment improvements one can do to function better and live longer. Essentially, the big swing that takes care of numerous other things: metabolic health, fat loss, and energy levels. One of my goals for the first half of 2025 is getting perfect metabolic markers. So that's why I decided to test them. I did a full glucose metabolic profile and I also tested cholesterol levels. Particularly, two things interest me the most: glucose, fasting glucose levels, and HbA1c. For reference, we'll take the numbers of Brian Johnson as a standard, arguably the healthiest and most measured person on planet Earth who's doing this as a sport. Fasting glucose levels measure the amount of glucose in your body in a fasted state in the morning. It's a great assessment of metabolic health and blood sugar management. Optimal levels range between 3.9 to 5.6 millimoles per liter or 70 to 100. Being over 5.6 to 6.9 or 100 to 125 is hyperglycemia or prediabetes. Brian Johnson is at around 4.6 millimoles per liter or 82 milligrams per deciliter plasma glucose, typically 10 to 15% higher than blood glucose and a bit more accurate. My numbers for fasting blood glucose are 4.5 millimole per liter or 81 milligrams per deciliter, with the optimal clinical outcomes being below 5.3 or 95. So based on this, I'm already in a healthy range for fasting blood glucose. However, my goal is to get a bit closer to the number 4, so from 4.5 to slightly lower it towards 4 to 4.2. Next, we have HbA1c or hemoglobin A1c, which measures the average blood glucose for the past 2 to 3 months. HbA1c measures how much glucose is attached to your blood cells, providing a long-term view of blood sugar control. Normal levels are below 42 millimole per mole, pre-diabetic are 42 to 47, and diabetic are 48 or above. See, an optimal level is somewhere around 30 to 35 millimole per mole. Brian's levels hover around 26 millimole per mole or 4.5%. Mine are around 32 millimole per mole or 5.1%. Optimal clinical outcomes range between 4.5 and 5.6. So my goal is to slightly lower it or maintain it slightly below 5%, while putting on muscle and increasing the intake in carbs and total calories. The reason this might be challenging is because of my lifestyle, particularly my work schedule. Although I have been used to low carb and fasting for such a long time, currently, if my goal, my main objective is to put on muscle mass, that's not going to work for me, at least not as well. So in order to support those anabolic pathways, I'll need a caloric surplus, which is harder to get if you're eating 2 meals a day or 3 meals a day. So I'll need to kind of diversify and increase meal size and also increase the time window in which I eat, particularly due to my work schedule. The reason this is challenging is because it's hard to, at the same time, improve metabolic markers by a large margin while still increasing caloric count and total intake of carbohydrates. But if the muscle requests it, I'll do it. So this is why I've decided to take things a bit more seriously and optimize for both my goals: better metabolic markers, but also more muscle mass. My schedule is such that my deep work or creative focus window is scheduled in the morning from 8 to 1. Then I eat my breakfast and rest for an hour. After that, I go to the gym, exercise for about 45 minutes intensely, lifting weights. Then I start work at around 3 o'clock and finish off till 8 to 9 o'clock. This makes fasting almost impossible and late night eating a must, which is not good news for metabolic health. So based on this, here are the 4 things I'm doing to improve my metabolic function in such a hectic schedule. First thing is carbs. Let's talk about meal timing and glycemic index. As you know, I'll have to bump up my calories to fit a caloric surplus and increase my intake of carbohydrates if I want to grow muscle effectively. This makes it a bit challenging. I need smarter strategies around meal timing and glycemic index of foods so that I prevent glucose on a roller coaster or high, sharp spikes and drops in glucose. So what I do is I tend to prioritize high glycemic index foods like fruits, white rice, oats, or pasta as close to my training window as possible to fuel my workout and use this glucose right away as energy, not to raise my blood sugar. Then close to nighttime, I try to reduce the intake of simple carbohydrates as much as I can and go heavier on healthy fats, proteins, and complex carbohydrates. This is when I'd have some lentils, veggies, whole wheat pasta, or sweet potatoes. The aim is to position my high GI foods as close to my training as possible so the muscle needs to use it as fuel, or at least it'll be replenished as glycogen fast. This will help me not overtax my metabolic system. Now let's talk about glucose stabilizing agents. With carb heavier meals, particularly with simple carbs, or particularly when I move to that nighttime window, it's a smart strategy based on my research to have an agent that'll help your body manage blood glucose better. So this is where 2 things, berberine and apple cider vinegar, come into play. Based on some of the research that I've done, berberine and apple cider vinegar seem to fit the criteria of what I would consider a blood glucose stabilizing agent that's relatively natural but also effective. Since you watched this video, I deem you're interested in the science of optimizing health, longevity, and performance. Got good news for you. We've distilled science into short letters. Now you can get hacks into improving sleep score, mitochondrial function, improving focus, and burning fat faster. Everything one wants. And until we hit 1,000 subscribers, it's free, you can join. We've just upgraded our newsletter, Keys to Vitality. Now you can join more than 500 active readers, getting 1 key insight to increase energy, improve daily function, and unlock vitality. 4 minutes every Saturday morning. If you're into living a fulfilled, long life filled with meaningful experiences, I believe being vibrant plays a major part in it. So, highly recommended. Age slower, feel better, and be smarter. Scan this code, links in the description. Apple cider vinegar slows down carbohydrate digestion and enhances insulin sensitivity, while berberine activates AMPK and improves glucose uptake by cells. So, anytime higher than optimal carb meal fits the plate, I make sure to assist in the lowering of glucose by either taking berberine or a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar before that meal. Next thing is training more. Yeah, I think this can be underrated, but it's so important. I've increased my strength training volume from about 2 times weekly to 4 to 5 times per week on an average basis. So I'm already conditioning my body to grow more muscle, which if I succeed in, I'm gonna have more of that reserve that is able to suck in more glucose and help me stabilize blood sugar levels better and faster. So gaining muscle is already a very important element in improving metabolic function, and this is one of the reasons why I do it. I tend to synchronize my goals to hit 2 targets at once. So in terms of movement, I have about 4 to 5 strength trainings weekly. Then I walk around 8 to 10,000 steps on a daily basis because I work in the gym as a kinesiologist. And the next thing is I'm trying to do 1 low intensity steady state cardio weekly. So some sort of hiking or fast walking or even rowing or swimming if it's up to that. This is what I would consider a great level of physical activity that's optimal for improving one's ability to manage glucose better, with of course a lower impact on our metabolic system and lower rises in blood sugar. The debate on how good carbs are completely shifts once one starts to train intensely. The body is finally using all the glucose that's ingested to replete muscle glycogen and power energy. The same amount of carbs that can be hazardous for a sedentary person can be a great fuel for an athlete. Last thing I'm reintroducing into my routine is fasting. And we're talking about 16 to 18 hours of fasting in total, only 3 days weekly. So I'm a big fan of fasting, and I've been used to cycling carbs on and off, eating low carb, and even fasting since I was a teenager. However, now that my goal is to put on muscle mass, I've seen that I'm struggling a lot with that if I don't need enough carbs and enough calories in particular. So as you've seen, my work schedule is quite hectic. For 4 days a week, I'm finishing off in the gym at around 9 o'clock, so my last meal is 9:30, which is again too late for my standards, but that is the best I can do currently. And for the other 3 days where I'm not late in the gym, I am cutting my last meal to be at around 5 to 6 o'clock, so I'm having full 16 to 18 hours of fasting on a weekly basis for 3 days. And I know consistent eating schedule and meal timing is important, but this is the best that I can do within my current situation. So far, I assessed it's better to give the body 3 days to reset and fast to improve my metabolic function rather than eating late every single day of the week. This can help me sort of detox, improve the machinery that creates energy, and also stabilize blood sugar. Let's see where it takes us. Measurements. How do I plan to monitor my glucose levels, or HbA1c for that matter? Well, here's a budget option. Now, of course, if you can have an access to a high quality continuous glucose monitoring device, it's of course a better bet as it's more accurate and gives a more higher quality data, real-time feedback of how your habits, meals, trainings, and stressors and alcohol impact your blood glucose levels. That's the patch that you put on your arm that tracks your glucose, and it can be linked to an app on your phone so you can see how the things you're doing affect your glucose level real time. This doesn't have to be worn all the time, but it is a great experiment to invest in for 1 to 3 months at a time so you see how your current lifestyle plays with your glucose levels and are they raising in a healthy range. This way, you can learn a lot about your body and improve your habits. The budget method I'll currently use is a manual blood glucose monitor with strips. Every other week, I take a blood glucose measurement and see the change in my fasting blood glucose levels. I'm also experimenting with this after meals, so I'm measuring my glucose after I had the same meal week after week, with the same amount of carbohydrates, fats, and protein, exactly the same meal, same timing, so I can see over the course of a few weeks how does my body improve or deteriorate in managing blood glucose. Beyond measuring fasting glucose every other week and glucose after a specific meal, I will also do a full glucose and lipid profile testing once again in 5 months just to see HbA1c level, lipid profile, and fasting glucose again.